It was August 19, 2025, when a faint radar blip appeared on NATO screens in Šiauliai Air Base, Lithuania. The object was fast, climbing, and heading north from Kaliningrad. Operators immediately flagged it. Russian jets had once again crossed into the Baltic Sea's international airspace. At 4:22 a.m., scramble orders were given. Two U.S. Air Force F-35E Lightning II stealth fighters, already on alert under NATO's Baltic air policing mission, roared into the night sky. Their engines shook the ground as they accelerated past 900 kilometers per hour within seconds, climbing to 25,000 feet. This was routine. NATO fighters intercept Russian aircraft in the Baltic almost every week, but what happened next would shock the world. At 4:38 a.m., 65 kilometers west of Klaipėda, Lithuania, the F-35 pilots made visual contact. Two Russian Su-27 flankers were flying aggressively, weaving close to NATO patrol routes. The American pilots followed standard intercept protocol: approach, signal, and escort. For the first 90 seconds, everything followed the tense but familiar script of Cold War-style encounters. But then, without warning, a Russian Su-27 broke formation and locked its fire control radar onto the lead US F-35. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared. The American pilot's voice crackled through radio. Falcon 1, locked by hostile radar. Repeat. Locked. Requesting permission to maneuver permission was granted instantly. The F-35 banked hard, releasing countermeasures. But then at 4:41:27 a.m., it happened. The Russian Su-27 fired a single R-27 air-to-air missile. Its plume lit up the pre-dawn sky. At a speed of Mach 4.5, the missile closed distance in less than 12 seconds. The American pilot attempted an evasive roll, deploying flares and jammers, but the missile struck the rear fuselage of the F-35 at 4:41:39 a.m., just 31 kilometers from Lithuanian airspace. A fireball erupted. The $90 million stealth fighter spun downward in flames. The second U.S. F-35 pilot's voice shouted over comms, "Mayday! Mayday! Falcon 1 is hit. Eject, eject, eject." At 4:42 a.m., a parachute deployed. The pilot had ejected successfully, but as he descended into the icy waters of the Baltic, NATO's nightmare had begun. A Russian missile had just downed a U.S. jet in international airspace. Within 2 minutes, emergency protocols were in motion. NATO radar confirmed the missile trajectory. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft, orbiting 200 kilometers away, recorded the entire launch. By 4:46 a.m., NATO command in Ramstein, Germany, relayed the situation to the Pentagon. The coded message was stark: U.S. asset downed by hostile fire. Pilot status: alive, at sea. Engagement confirmed. Hostile destroyers from the U.S. 6th Fleet, stationed in the Baltic, were ordered to move toward the pilot's location. A MH-60R Seahawk helicopter launched from the USS Gravely at 4:53 a.m., racing to pluck the downed pilot from the freezing waters. By 5:07 a.m., the pilot was hoisted to safety, alive but shaken. His words broadcast to command: "No accident. They locked, they fired." This was deliberate. Even before NATO could issue a statement, Russian state media went live. At 6 a.m., Moscow time, anchors claimed the F-35 had violated Russian sovereign airspace near Kaliningrad and was neutralized after ignoring repeated warnings. The Kremlin framed it as defense, not aggression, but NATO's radar logs told a different story. The F-35 never entered Russian territory. It was struck while patrolling legal international airspace. By sunrise, 5:45 a.m. Baltic time, images of debris washing ashore near Curonian Spit began circulating online. Video from fishermen showed the burning wreckage floating just 40 kilometers off Lithuania's coast. On Twitter and Telegram, hashtags like #World War III and #Baltic Crisis trended within hours. Markets in Europe opened shaky. Oil prices spiked 6% before noon. At 7 a.m., NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg addressed the press. This was a direct attack on a NATO aircraft. The consequences will be serious. Back in Washington, President of the United States was briefed at 12:10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Within the Situation Room, generals and cabinet members debated immediate response options: a direct strike on the Russian Su-27 base in Kaliningrad, deployment of additional squadrons to Poland and the Baltics, naval blockade maneuvers in the Baltic Sea. At 12:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the president issued the order: order. We respond tonight. The world must know an attack on one of ours will be met with force. As daylight spread across Europe, U.S. bombers were already fueling up in the UK and Germany. The Sixth Fleet's destroyers repositioned in the Baltic. Satellites adjusted to monitor Kaliningrad in real time. Everyone knew what was coming, but no one knew how far it would go. Because at 4:41 a.m., when a Russian missile hit a U.S. F-35, the world stepped 1 minute closer to a war it had long feared. At 2100 local Baltic time, August 19th, the silence broke. From air bases in the United Kingdom, Germany, and Poland, squadrons of U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagles and F-35A Lightning II stealth fighters lifted off into the night sky. Their mission: punish Russia's Kaliningrad enclave, the very stronghold from which the Su-27s had launched hours earlier. By 2143, the first wave crossed into Baltic skies. Supporting them were B-52 Stratofortress bombers cruising at 30,000 feet, loaded with precision-guided JDAM bombs. In the Baltic Sea below, USS Gravely, USS Donald Cook, and USS Ross bristled with Tomahawk missiles, waiting for the order to fire. The world held its breath. At 22:01, the order came. From the decks of the Sixth Fleet, 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles arced into the night, traveling at 880 kilometers per hour toward Kaliningrad. Their first targets: S-400 surface-to-air missile sites around Chernyakovsk and Baltisk. Seconds later, radar operators in Kaliningrad watched their screens fill with streaking blips. At 22:04, explosions rocked the perimeter. The S-400 batteries that had long been Russia's shield against NATO jets were ripped apart in fireballs. Simultaneously, F-35s dropped GBU-53/B Stormbreaker bombs on radar installations, blinding Russian defenses within minutes. Kaliningrad, one of the most militarized zones in Europe, suddenly looked exposed. At 22:17, a formation of F-15Es swooped low over the Baltic and released bunker-buster munitions onto Chikalovsk Air Base, home to Russia's Su-27 and Su-30 squadrons. Hangars erupted, flames consuming parked aircraft. Within 10 minutes, Russian losses mounted. At least 7 fighter jets destroyed on the ground, 3 radar stations disabled, and 2 ammunition depots igniting in secondary explosions that lit up the night sky. Witnesses across Kaliningrad reported the ground shaking. One described it as, "It felt like the earth was tearing open." The night turned to day in seconds. At 22:28, Russia attempted to respond. From coastal batteries near Baltisk, they launched P-800 Onyx anti-ship missiles toward U.S. destroyers in the Baltic. But within moments, Aegis defense systems aboard USS Gravely tracked and intercepted the missiles, detonating them mid-air in spectacular bursts of light. It was clear the Americans had anticipated the move, and Russia's response failed to break through. At 2300 hours, President of the United States addressed the world from the White House. His words were firm, deliberate. An American aircraft was shot down in international airspace. Tonight, we answered. Let it be clear, if you fire on our pilots, we will strike back, decisively and without hesitation. The broadcast was simulcast across Europe and Asia. In Moscow, Russian officials scrambled to frame the U.S. strike as reckless aggression, but footage of burning Kaliningrad installations spread online before state censors could suppress it. The following morning, August 20th, 8:30 a.m. Brussels time, NATO convened an emergency meeting. For the first time in decades, Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, was openly discussed. Allies from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia called for further deployments. Germany pledged to send Eurofighter Typhoons eastward. The UK announced an additional carrier group to the North Sea. Within hours, the Baltic region became a fortress. NATO aircraft circling continuously, naval convoys forming barriers, and troops mobilizing along borders. Financial markets reeled. Oil prices spiked above $115 per barrel, the highest in over a decade. The ruble plunged. European stock markets dropped 5% in a single day. In Beijing, Chinese officials called for restraint, while quietly increasing surveillance of U.S. forces in the Pacific. In Tehran, Iranian hardliners praised Moscow and hinted at expanding support to Russia. The UN Security Council held an emergency session, but it quickly descended into deadlock. Russia and China against the U.S. and its allies. For ordinary people across the globe, fear spread. Was this the opening shot of a wider war? Satellite imagery released on August 20th confirmed the scale of destruction. At least 40% of Kaliningrad's air defense systems destroyed. Multiple airfields crippled, communications infrastructure in blackout. Thousands of civilians displaced as explosions shook residential areas near military sites. What had been one of Russia's most fortified regions was now scarred, its once impenetrable defenses shattered in a single night. Analysts warned that both sides now faced a dangerous crossroads. If Russia retaliated further, NATO could invoke Article 5, leading to direct war. If NATO pushed deeper, Russia might escalate to nuclear threats. The Baltic Sea, once a tense but stable frontier, had become the flashpoint of potential global conflict. Former generals described it bluntly. The Cuban Missile Crisis was about ships and missiles. This is about pilots, jets, and real-time combat. One wrong move and we're past the point of no return. As dawn broke over Kaliningrad on August 20th, smoke still curled into the sky. Burned-out hangars, shattered runways, and cratered missile sites bore witness to the scale of America's retaliation. On the other side of the Baltic, in Vilnius and Warsaw, NATO pilots sat strapped into cockpits, waiting for the next order. Destroyers patrolled silently. Satellites scanned the skies for any sign of Russian mobilization. The world held its breath. Because at 4:41 a.m., when a Russian missile struck an American F-35, history had changed course. And as the fires of Kaliningrad burned, the question was no longer if this would escalate, but how far and how fast.